Hey everyone, what's going on? My name is Stephanie Graham. I'm an artist and filmmaker, and I'm also an extremely curious person. Some would go as far as to say that I am nosy as fuck. The nerve. I started this podcast because I wanted to interview people. I'm not just talking to anyone either. I'm talking to people who are in the thick of what they do. I want to know how they live their life and how they get things done so that I can apply some of their savvy to my own life. I'm sharing this with you so that you too can do the same. We can do it together. We all got to start somewhere, and if you're not looking for practical info, stick around anyway because my guests are fascinating and it's my goal to get to the bottom of their I mean, aren't we all just a little bit curious of what it's like to live someone else's life? And if we do it the same? There are also times when I will feel called to catch up with you one-on-one and let you know about what's going on with me, either in life or with my art practice. You didn't think I'd get the dirt on all these cool people and not let you know what's going on with me, did you? I mean, I'm a Libra. We believe in balance. Listen, I am a big believer that even though we are all different, we can still find ways to relate to each other. It's time to get down to business, so welcome to the Nosy AF podcast. Hey guys, first things first, before we get into today's conversation, I want to give a big congratulations to Amanda, who produces this podcast. She recently was married and I'm just so excited for her. I've known her a very long time and she is a wonderful person and I am just so excited for her new journey. So Amanda, congratulations and thank you for helping me with this podcast. You are 100% a part of my self-care routine in creating this show. So thank you so much. Congratulations, boo. Congratulations, Amanda. Okay, so this is a very exciting day because, of course, we just congratulated Amanda for being married. Another thing I wanted to bring to your attention, pretty please, is that I am planning a listener question episode, ask me anything style episode. Never done anything like this before, and I thought it could be fun. And so if you have questions, please send them to me I have an Instagram for Nosy AF. So at the Nosy AF pod, that is the Instagram. If you could send the questions there, or you can also send the questions just to my email at stephanie@missgraham.com. I would love that. I think it should be fun and we'll just see where it goes. So I will be announcing that and reminding you as the shows go on until it's time for me to answer the questions. So that is something fun that I'm looking forward to. And so let's get into today's conversation, my curious mind friends. So today we're diving into the vibrant world of landscape architecture with the incredible Maci Nelson, who is a landscape designer who not only sculpts outdoor spaces, but also weaves compelling stories through her podcast, The Landscape Nerd, and her journalism. Ever wondered what it takes to design the landscapes beyond your front lawn? Well, today we're going to uncover all of this as Maci's journey into landscape architecture and explore the intricacies of her craft. Forget about just stepping on someone's grass. Have you all ever been in trouble for that? I used to get in trouble for doing that all the time. Like my grandma's neighbors, get off that grass, get off that grass. It's like, lady, I need to cross your grass to get to the gas station, to get my sun-kissed fruit gems. Shut up. Oh my God. Could you imagine? I would never tell an old lady to shut up. I just would not dare. In my mind, yes, but absolutely not. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so Maci is also she's going to define the difference between a landscape architect and a landscaper. And then, we've all seen these shows like Pimp My Ride, Hip Hop My House, but what about Pimp My Lawn? So I asked Maci about this kind of stuff and we just get imaginative, exploring how she envisions ultimate lawn transformation and prepare for a creative journey into the world of landscape architecture. So I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. Maci is awesome. She's going to tell us who we need to look at for landscape architecture. I just never knew about this field really until I met my friend Carolina, and then until I became close friends with Maci. And so I'm really, really excited for you to hear this conversation. And I don't know, I think it's a fascinating journey, where landscaping meets storytelling and we get to discover connection she forges between people and the captivating world of landscape architecture. I mean, yeah, this is really nerdy, but I really think that you guys will enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Maci Nelson. All right. Are you ready to do this?
I am so ready. I'm so excited.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Maci, for being on my podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. So, Maci, you are a landscape architect. Can you tell us what that means? Because I feel like when I think of landscape architecture, I think of just like my parents have called like the landscapers over. So can you talk about it?
Yes. So I am trained as a landscape architect. I have to still pass my licensure exams because that is one of the big differences is that landscape architect is licensed to practice in public realm. So like the parks, the streets. And so like I could actually do the drawings that people build from versus a landscape designer who can still do the conceptual and do a lot of the process, but they just don't have the authority to say like, 100% safe for public like use. They just don't have that authority. So that's the big difference. And then when you have a landscaper or a gardener or a horticulturalist, those are all like specialists in the actual care of the landscape and the maintenance. So you can think of like the design side where a landscape architect, that's the profession, is to design the outdoor spaces. A landscape designer can be also a horticulturalist, also a landscaper, also a like gardener, because they are maybe laying out the plans, but they're also taking care of the space. So that's how I would break it down is like design professional versus like design professional and like care and maintenance. So that would be.
And it's like yours is professional versus, I mean, not that like, I guess the landscapers that come to my folks' house, they can have an opinion about where
exactly
things
right.
go.
Like you can design, like anyone can be a designer in a way. But when you're a landscape architect or trained as a designer, you learn how to design in a lot of different spaces versus like just say someone's yard or backyard. You learn how to design a park or design a street or design a plaza. Like you learn about all the outdoor things that need design help versus like, what's appropriate.
I feel like this is somewhat in the medical field too with nurses. I feel like they have like these layers like this. Like there's like the one nurse that just comes around and like scans your bracelet to gives you your aspirin. And then there's the ones that can like write you a prescription and do your pap smear. Like it's just like, it's like there's levels to this.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like the ambiguous, like invisible world of outdoor space and care. Like, you walk outside, you don't really think about how it got built. You don't think about who takes care of it. It's just there. And you know that someone, in theory, is responsible for it. And but that's handled somewhere else. And I think like having that as like a example of like the different nurses, different niches, same thing. Like you could be an expert in designing camps. You can be an expert in designing like garden beds. You can be an expert in like specialize in all these things. And that's what's pretty cool because it's like all of the outside. So there's a lot. There's a lot to look at.
How did you get into that?
I spent entirely too much time outside. And I really thought that like gardening was a hobby. Like it did not cross my mind once that it was a job. Like working outside in gardens and designing them was a job. Don't know why. I think the American school system made me very like science oriented
Yeah.
So I didn't have a full scope of like how to blend art and science. Like I loved both, but I thought I had to pick. So so for undergrad, I went to school for biomedical humanities, and it
What
was
is
like
that?
basically pre-med with
Oh,
some
okay.
ethics classes. Um, so that was it. And then I took for a science course, like credit, I took a ecology lab,
Mm-hmm.
and that was what really opened my eyes to like, oh, these giant systems that you look at, like waters and streams, like, and just how do you know what they are, and they connect everything, and that was like, it blew my mind. And also the maps were really, really pretty, like
Hmm.
that made like that we had to make and had to study from. So I learned a lot about plant, like, communities, and like what's a prairie, what's a meadow, and how do we protect the pollinators, like what is a butterfly garden. Like that is what that course like helped me get in touch with. And then it started to shed a light on people a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
like how people started to look at their landscapes. Like people in general don't tend to care about all of the big systems, but they do care about their butterfly garden. And you're like,
Mm.
okay, so if I get to talk to like a homeowner about a butterfly garden and educate them on that, that makes a big difference. Do that 100 times, and all of a sudden you have 100 butterfly gardens, and you start to build a system. So
Yeah.
long story short is like, after I finished school, I was like, I do not want to go to medical school. That did not seem good. So I took up gardening as a stopgap, really.
Okay.
And then when I found out it was a job. I found out that there was a like professional degree about outdoor spaces and designing, and it just so happened to open up a school downtown Cleveland, which is where I live. And so I was like, oh, it's only a 20-minute commute to what could possibly be my dream career. Okay, I will apply.
Yeah.
And I got in.
Who told you it was a job? You just saw somebody else doing it, or?
I yeah, so my boss at the landscaping/gardening company, I was like, "Oh, I like, how do I maybe get more into this like with you?" Cuz she always used me for design stuff. She'd be
Oh,
like,
okay.
where do you think this plant should go? Where do you think that should go?" And that was like so fun to me. And I was like, "Oh man, I wish I could do this all day." And she was like, "Well, I guess you could get a design certificate." And I was like, "A what?" And she was like, "Yeah, you could do that." But she was kind of against herself getting any of it. She just was like, I don't really need it. And that's true. There's so many self-taught people out there.
Yeah.
But I had no idea what design was. Like literally until the first day I stepped into grad school, I was like, I don't know what design is. They accepted me, and I had no idea. Like I gave a portfolio and everything. It was just like I didn't know what design meant
Yeah.
until I started doing it. So my boss was like, yeah, you could do that. And then I Googled it. And then I found out that landscape architecture was a thing through
Oh,
Google.
wow. So you're like bosses out here giving advice that she should be taking, kind of thing?
I don't know. Well, that's
Or
not
she's obviously
inaccurate.
knowledgeable about it, at least. Like,
She
you
was
could.
knowledgeable, and I think it was like they're very like off the grid kind of people. Like I think they just didn't want paper trails anywhere. So like
Yeah.
getting
Yeah, I know, right? I know. You're like, don't mess up my job.
that's exactly, they're like, I guess you could go do that, but like don't bring that bureaucratic nonsense here is probably what they were thinking.
Yeah, and sometimes people have just been in like the game for so long, they don't even think about that there are like educational resources. I know I like find that in my field too. Like people, they've just been like they've grown up in film or whatever, and they're just like,
Yeah.
oh, you could take a class. Like, oh, they have this. Like, that's what you went to school for. Like, they're just so shocked.
But I really feel that, because I think that's why I didn't know it was a career. I thought it was something that had to be passed down, that you had to spend, like, that you could only get through experience, which is true. I mean, nothing matches experience. But when you don't have, growing up in it or something like that, like my mom didn't have like a garden. My aunt
Mm-hmm.
did and my grandmother did, but once again, a hobby. So like
Yeah.
if no one in your family was making a living off of this stuff, how would you really know? And you probably understand this. It's like, what are the jobs you know about? what mom does, what dad does, or whatever, like what your parents do.
Sure.
Maybe the firefighter, policeman, lawyer, doctor,
Yeah.
and then that's it. Like those are the jobs that you know about. And so there's all the other ones. And unless someone tells you or you experience it somehow, that like how are you
Yeah.
gonna know? Especially
I say,
probably with podcasting too. Sorry.
oh no,
Yeah.
totally, totally. I feel like I remember I went on with this guy who said, and I always remember this quote. He's like, "You have a job that nobody knows about, like that people just aren't aware of." And I remember that when I met a girl who was a jeweler, and I'm just like, "Wait a minute, you like play with beautiful precious stones all day?" She's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, it's pretty great." And I'm just like, I didn't even think of that. Like, like I find like people will be doing these jobs where I'm like, oh my God, if I would have known that, I might have like checked that, at least
Mm-hmm.
looked into it,
Absolutely. And I just think I don't think that career exploration happens a lot for the people who are probably in that middle ground of like not like I'm artistic, I'm creative, but I don't identify as like an artist per se because my view growing up of what artistry was very like visual, very like 2D almost, but like and I didn't have that skill set. But now there's terms like creative that are floating around in my circle and
Yeah.
it's just different and like as an artist that there's so much out there, but you can only consume so much, and we do rely, I think, on like our network to show us what that is. And if people don't know, like
I know.
they don't know, you never know. So yeah.
You mentioned like with public parks and stuff, like that you have to make it safe. Did you say something
Mm-hmm.
like that? Like,
Yeah.
I guess I want to know, this might sound like stupid, but how does like a public park, isn't it just sort of automatically safe? I mean, it's a park.
Oh no! See, when you remember the what you mentioned about like an invisible job or like
Yeah.
something that no one knows about, so it's
Yeah.
like in a open space, right? You have to
Uh-huh.
think that a lot of the stuff that we see around us was not there, right?
Okay.
Like it's not this is not what the natural world looks like.
Yeah.
So that means there are choices that have to be made in order to build a space. So if you think about something like Central Park, right, which is one of the
Yeah.
biggest hallmarks, so
That's what came to mind.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
is like one of the most famous pieces of landscape architecture, if not the most famous piece of landscape architecture. And that whole place is designed like down to every mound, down to every grouping of trees, down to every hedge. Like, because imagine if you just put up a giant wall of trees around the entire perimeter, no one could see in. Like, that's not safe either. Like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But so that means choices had to be made in order to think about how people move through the space. And so health, safety, and welfare, that's what we, really focus on, is making sure things aren't trip hazards, making sure people can walk or utilize the paths if they're a wheelchair user or any type of disability. How do you make a place accessible? Because I
Yeah.
could have put up stairs everywhere and then all of a sudden no one's allowed in who doesn't fit a very like narrow profile of a user.
Sure.
So that is how I would start to explain, like, if you look at something like Central Park, what you imagine is safe is derived from a series of choices, not just there. Because if you think about like going hiking or something,
Yeah.
that is more natural.
Yeah.
And you know what that's like, rocky trails, you got to watch your step, you
Yeah.
sometimes have to lean up against like a ridge. Like, that's not necessarily safe. It can be fun and adventurous,
Sure.
but not like safe. So that is how I would frame it.
Man, I feel like these public spaces, they need to have credits like films.
Thank you. We've been
Like-
trying to do that. Like, I'm so glad you said that. It's
As you were
so
talking, I'm
hard.
like, man, that sounds like a lot of people, a lot of meetings, a lot of back
Oh,
and forth. And it should say like,
100%.
welcome to Central Park. designed by blah 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 with Maci and Malcolm and Cheryl and
I
like these are the people
100%
who
agree.
participated.
And the thing is, like, I love that you said that because it's actually a kind of a campaign that I'm working on with
Oh, really?
my group is like showing the faces behind the spaces. I didn't mean to make that rhyme. That just came out.
I know,
But
right?
it was
Bars, the bars.
but it's that idea is like there's so many people that go into making a space, but because we don't think about it, like even a parking lot. Do you know how many meetings you have to have about a parking lot? It's insane. And
Really?
oh yeah, like because you're talking about utilities, like the sewer district, civil engineering, which is really they do a lot of that. You have to look at landscaping to make sure that there's screening so that you don't have headlights running into people's like doors
Oh,
and
sure.
like windows, and then you also have to think about like the amount of spaces that are there and like there's
Wow.
just so much that goes into it. And yeah, no one knows, but it's like for people, by people. So
Yeah.
yeah, having
Yeah.
credits would be amazing to be like, you know what?
Yes.
So they'll buy dude, just like a little sign,
A little sign.
plaque.
Listen,
You know?
when we pay for our parking, the receipt comes out with
Yes,
like
yeah. I want the ribbon receipt for all of it. Or it's like a
yes.
QR code, just a little, like if someone wants to scan it, just to be like, oh, who built this space? I think would do so much to help people understand
Yeah.
that there's like people in their community who like had a hand in making this everyday space.
Yeah, it's so interesting because here in Pooch Cove, like right across the street is the Atlantic Ocean, right?
Wow.
And I know, I'm like, these people really like have it made. And then um there are some houses up the hill and someone's built, obviously I'm sure some like architecture company, but somebody had to like built basically like a creek that like runs through the rocks, like it runs over these rocks, and it has like that like little metal tunnel thing. I don't know like what these things are called that the water is going through, but it's like dumping into the Atlantic Ocean. Like, and I'm like, I wonder how they figured it out because the water, like, I don't know if there's probably like above us some other kind of like lake because there's just water all around here that like they figured out and they've dug this through. But it's just like so pretty. And it's like, because you could tell, I'm like, there's no way they placed these rocks here, right? Is this stuff natural? But you don't know. Maybe they did move stuff around. I have absolutely no idea. But I just love how, like, if you don't have a house directly across from the ocean and it's up, that you're like still connected to the water, which is like such a great quality of like living in this, such a great attribute of like living over here. So I'm just like, now I'm like, I wonder who built that, like who decided that, because it's so smart, because it's like everybody still gets to like, now the person who owns this gallery, their backyard is the Atlantic Ocean. It is amazing. And Maci, they have a sea lion that comes visit them. I
That's
know.
amazing. You're like,
but
what?
I'm just like, okay, that's amazing. So like, yeah, these people up here can have this like little creek running, and it's like still connected. Because when you go down there, you do see that tunnel, like, and you do see it opening up into the ocean.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, wow.
Yeah, wow. There's a phrase that's really popular. It's also a book in landscape architecture called Design with Nature. So it is a book that is very old, and like I think it's wonderful, but it just, it's like 50, 60 years old, and we still reference it, but it's not like the sentiment is there. And I think that is what I want to focus on. But it is like a tenet of that. So it's like, highlighting things that are already happening in nature, kind of this sort of belief of we can't make it better. Well, I'm not going to say that. There's a lot of like very different types of practice. Like some people try to really push what we understand as nature, and do something really like fun, like that floating island out. I should know. Maybe you edit this part out, you look it up yourself. But there's that floating island in New York with like that looks like a bunch of Q-tips floating. Like a landscape architecture firm worked on that project. It's not just one. personally.
Oh,
But, so people try to push that idea of like what's natural and what's acceptable as natural when you're working with people in different environments. But,
yeah.
I personally practice is like, how can we work with what we have already, what was already here, but
Yeah.
different kinds of practice. So that example that you have is, really using the natural landscape as a way to amplify, the gallery space. Like, you're like, I'm not going to compete with the ocean. Yeah,
Yeah.
how do we work with it and make it more obvious how amazing it is?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have your podcast, The Landscape Nerd,
I do.
and it's such a great project, especially for a nerd such as myself, to just binge out on information I had no idea I wanted to know because it's so specific. Talk about it. Why'd you do it?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
like, is it for the everyday person like myself? It seems like it's both.
It is both. I think it's more so for a general audience
Yeah.
because it started off as a like mini cry for help, I guess. I'm not gonna lie. I was finishing up grad school in design, and
Mm-hmm.
as wonderful as I think the profession is, the future outlook on it is very bleak for women, especially women of
Mm.
color, and especially mothers, which I was, I
Ugh.
still am, but
Yeah.
it was like mid-career and you kind of tap out because unless you have the like time to dedicate in this very traditional design setting, then like which the stereotype is a ton of hours, like 60-hour work weeks minimum. You're eat, sleep, and breathe the work. You're getting the drawings out, like bunch of meetings. It's just like this like passionate work, but it wasn't about people and it wasn't like
Mm.
connecting anything. So I had kind of resigned myself to I may not have a foot in this world after I graduate. And I
Oh
love what it
man.
can do. So that's why I started the podcast because I wanted to connect with other people that I could continue to talk about this with.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who they were because the world is so very like kind of narrow and
Yeah.
small because landscape architects are like they're not that many of us. like,
Yeah. Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least in the US and like abroad there's a ton of different fields that like all very much so deal with landscape architecture. And I started off doing it anonymously, telling stories of places I had been. And then eventually, as it grew, I started to put my name out there. And thanks to you, your encouragement, I started to put my face out there. And then,
Mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
before I knew it, I was like the first woman of color mother to have a podcast in landscape architecture. And I didn't know that at the time. That's not how I set it out to be. But it slowly became apparent as the podcast grew. And then I started to be able to talk about a ton of different stuff. It started off with like, me nerding out about things that I thought were cool in our profession that I knew people didn't know about. And then it started to be a space where people could talk about some real issues that they see in the industry, but also in communities in general. And, a big topic I just covered, which doesn't seem to be related to landscape at all, which was imposter syndrome. But that was
Mm.
something that I just used like the landscape world's experience of that. But it related to something that a lot of people, like a general audience,
Oh,
would,
for sure.
experience. So yeah, it was this nerdy little outlet so I could continue talking about it. But now it's turned into this platform to like bring awareness to a bunch of different stories that exist in landscape.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool that you've taken this ministry on.
It kind of does feel like, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you know what's so ridiculous? It's just so wild to me that like folks are like, and she's a mother. It's like,
Oh,
dude, are you kidding? Like, come on. Like, that's become a thing, even in art world, like residencies where like, artists can go similar to here and just like focus on their work. It's become like a big deal now. Like, this is for families, like for people to bring their families or bring their kids. And it's just like, well, yeah, like, of course you should be able to bring your kid. But like the fact that this is just like a new concept of allowing, like this is an apartment I'm in. Honestly, like, you know, anybody, like if I had a kid, they could totally be in here like playing as we're talking. Like I don't know. It just blows my mind how wild it
Oh,
is in 2023. People being like, and you know, Maci, she's a woman of color. She's doing this landscape
yeah.
project, and she's a mother. Yeah, no, she's a mother. It's like, are you kidding?
You're absolutely. There's a book that just came out called Soil by Camille Dungy,
Mm-hmm.
and she talks about that pretty much exclusively. It's about her being a writer and a poet, but also being a mom, and she is transforming her like HOA stereotypical lawn into a pollinator garden. And
Ooh.
she like talks about that process and then analyze it with like her experience as a Black mother. And it was incredible. But she talks a lot about this whole, we aren't allowed to put our mothering in our work. And so it's so hard to like, yeah, like it's great that people are paying attention to it and highlighting it, but there have been creatives who have been mothers for so long, and just it is impressive. I do like, woo, go moms, but we adapt and had to like, we do this all the time, and like celebrating it, great, but more like make room for us is
Yeah.
great too. But also being the first is not that great. Like to be like, oh, we're doing this now, or we're the first residency to like allow for families, or we're the first, or I'm the first mother who has a podcast on landscape architecture. Not cool, because we've been doing this for a long time, and
Yeah.
we've been around, for a
Yeah.
while.
And I
So
love seeing people's kids. Like, I feel like it doesn't make you any less of a person if your child comes into the camera and he's sitting there eating chicken tenders. It's
yeah.
not like, oh, you know what? I was going to hire Maci, but you know what? Her son came in and it's like, are you serious? Like, it's just so wild to me. Like, there was that news anchor who was talking and like his
Oh
kids came in the
yeah.
background.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the mom was just like, no, but it's
When
like,
she dove in to grab the kid, like, oh my God.
I feel like, I think about like if that kid would just came in there like March and just like was like hanging out next to their dad, it was like cool. And like we would all like acknowledge how cute that kid was and then
Uh-huh.
just like continue listening to the news program. It was just
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it just blows my mind. But I'm going to check out Soiled
Soil. Yeah.
because I have an HOA where I live, and there's a curator who I interviewed on this podcast who has like, maybe it's a pollinator garden, but it's like all natural stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell that it's curated. Like you could tell everything's intentional, but the city is like, her neighbors are always calling the city on her because they like act like it's weeds. But then when the city comes out, I think the guy was like, I wish more people would do this. This is great.
Yeah, they're like, are you kidding me? You're like, you just saved us X amount of water. Like by doing this kind of landscaping, you're saving the city money. And
Yeah.
it's great. Yeah, no, people are attached to their lawns. I have a whole episode on that. People are really attached to their lawns.
Hey, I just want to pop in here real quick to let you know that I'm an artist. I make work about social class, subcultures, race, and gender. These topics are complex, they're interesting, and they come up in my life all the time. Because I love to laugh, a lot of my work has humorous tones. I genuinely enjoy making and creating all sorts of things. My main medium is photography and film, but I also enjoy organizing art events. I would love to keep you in the loop of everything that's going on with my art exhibition, so please consider signing up for the Studiogram newsletter at missgram.com/sign up. Okay, back to the top. I know, because, all right, so like when I was like young, I would get yelled at for like walking on my grandma's neighbor's lawn. Is that really a bad thing to walk on lawn?
No, that is what it's like built for. But I will say this, like people, this has nothing to do with the plant. People are protective over their lawns for a whole bunch of reasons that they don't even understand. Like, no, it's not a bad thing, except for the fact that the clean, crisp green lines mark your property. Like, That's what that is. So it's like, don't walk on their lawn unless it's freshly seeded or
Sure.
something like that. Walking on someone's lawn is not a bad thing. It's supposed to handle the traffic. That is what these lawns were designed to do. But no, there's nothing wrong with it. You're not hurting the plant. You're just hurting someone's ego. You're hurting someone's like sense of material. Like that's all I can imagine at that point.
I feel like I should drive you around with like a megaphone and we should just like yell at these neighbors.
Yeah,
like,
just be like, your lawn's not that important.
Yeah.
You are more than your lawn. Maybe that's the messaging. Let's turn it around.
For sure. For sure. So like thinking about like folks' lawns, I was thinking about as you were talking, like using the like nature around us or, designing spaces. I think about like my neighborhoods, like Black and brown areas that, might not have nature. Like how could we make it prettier? And oh my gosh, and you know what too? I feel like as somebody who doesn't like bugs, like a butterfly garden does sound cute, but like I don't want a butterfly to fly in my house. I'm afraid. What if there's like, am I going to have like, if I have all this tall grass in my backyard, are rats about to be back there? Because then they're going to get in my house.
I think what's really fascinating. Okay, so we'll start with that point of like building a space that's like habitat, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I get it. People are like, oh, if there are bugs, are they going to come into my house because they're already here? However, if you're building a space that they like, they'll stay in that space. That's how living things kind of work. If you build a space outside that's awesome, they're going to want to be in the awesome place outside rather than the confusing space inside your house,
Yeah.
Now, when you have adaptive plants and or animals, let's just go with the whole rats idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a very nice natural habitat in like cityscapes. So they adapt to the ever-changing non-stationary things of dumpsters and sewers and things like that. So they are constantly moving. They are constantly seeking out different places to be. But if there was and now they basically don't have a natural space to be. So if they did,
that's sort of sad.
Yeah, right. Like, so that's where I'm like, I get it. The idea of them being in close proximity to you. But if you probably have no idea how many animals and insects are already in close proximity to you around your home that are perfectly comfortable where they are, not interested in coming inside your house. So that would be my main like explanation of you build a nice place, that's where they're going to want to be. Like if you build birdhouses, like think about that. People love birds. Put a birdhouse or a bird bath. You're not worried about a bird flying into your house.
Yeah.
So
should I make plants that the rats don't like?
You can do. I mean, I don't think I would say rats are not the ones I would be concerned about. I think they are a very urban dwelling animal, and don't put garbage and stuff out. Keep your landscape like nice and populated. And that's the other thing. Populated a like habitat that's healthy will balance out. So you'll have even if you were descended upon by rats, which is a terrifying thought, okay? Yes. But they're also going to be competing with squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, maybe deer. I don't know where you are. But it's like,
Chicago,
there's going to be so many other animals that will be in that space that it's just not going to make a lot of sense for there to be this overwhelming one population there. And yeah, like balance is key. That's why like a whole straight, strict lawn with nothing else going on is also not good, because that is just one thing. And so if it gets infected or there's a problem, it's like everything dies. Like that's the monoculture is that term. So you don't want something to be a monoculture. Yeah.
Is hiring a landscape architect or designer, is that like a luxury thing?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
design in general tends to be a luxury thing, which is why I did start the podcast as well, as like education.
Sure.
You know, it's like there's a lot of things, especially for the everyday person, that you don't need a designer to lay something out unless for some reason it's such a like, if it takes the burden off of you, if it brings you peace, if you really have no idea what you're doing, hiring a designer can be really helpful. But
Yeah.
a lot of times I think it's more like a consult. Like I think there's a lot of like consulting to happen. So an landscape architect, it's just so expensive. I would say like starting rate for a landscape architect is like 75 to 150 per hour starting.
Oh, wow.
You know? And then if you go with like a full-on firm, then it's upwards of like 200, because that is for that like higher level of drawing, like these safety documents, essentially these like legal documents that, you know, if something's wrong, they can get sued. Like that is why that cost is so high. So that's why it's luxury, and that's why that's usually reserved. No, not reserved, but you see it more in public projects, like things that are where people are really around a lot, because the city wants to make sure everyone's safe, so they're going to pay for that to make sure it happens, or the developer or whatever is going to make sure that happens, so they hire the landscape architect to make sure legal documents are, and it's regulated. You can't build a public space really without one. So
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
yeah, but it is a luxury. There are people who will hire landscape architects for, I mean, that keeps me in business too.
Yes, I know that's right. Please keep the lights on. Yes.
Yeah. Like if I help them, that's like the luxury, is like they don't have the time and they want something beautiful. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Who are some who are some famous landscape architects besides yourself?
Oh yeah, I know. I
should know
love
about.
thinking about that. So yes, myself, my close friends, because I'll have to plug them first.
Yes,
so
please.
there are these two wonderful designers. Maggie Aravena, she has her own firm called Studio Siembra, and it's based out of Denver, Colorado. But her approach is just very like holistic, and also a woman of color doing it on her own. Like, she's amazing. She's a rock star. She's just so cool. She was the emerging professional of the year in 2022 for landscape architecture. Like,
oh wow,
rock star. And cool. Then you have Divine Ndemeye, and she's based out of Vancouver, so she's in Canada as well, although the other side.
Yeah, right.
But she focuses on like BIPOC spaces and like designers and amplifying them, but also looking at Afrofuturism as a way to design spaces. So like those, I was like, those two definitely all stars to me. But there's like, that's our up and coming crew. But the people who you would actually recognize are like, one is long gone, but it's Frederick Law Olmsted. He's the one who designed Central Park.
Okay.
And he's designed several other places like the Boston Commons. He was the landscape architect for the World's Fair that was in Chicago.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Like laid out some of those gardens too. But that was his last project, I think. But then the one that's now like the hot one now is Piet Oudolf, and he's European. I don't know exactly where he's from, but he actually just got a profile in Vogue like last month, I think.
Very cool. Very cool. Go Piet.
I know. Yeah. Go Piet. And he does these amazing plantings. So Millennium Park, the gardens that are in there.
Yeah.
The in like the walled like garden.
Yeah.
So GGN, I believe, they're a big firm. They did the whole overall layout, but Piet did the planting. And that was that's one of the like showstoppers. Like, I took so many videos when I was there because the planting is just so beautiful. So like that's kind of to show you that difference of like how niche it can be, is like someone can do the whole plan, you know, for like the concept, and then it gets taken to like the person who's local and like building it and is like finding the materials to figure out how this actually works, and then that person goes to the plant person so then they can figure out exactly what's going to make this place shine. So it's always so collaborative. So like that's what's beautiful about the profession.
That's awesome. I know it's going to make me go back and look because it's like going to see art. You have to
Yeah.
check out this architecture, you know, and
When you find out
check it
something
out.
new, you're like, oh, let me see this with a new set of lenses, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think those are all the like all stars. But
Okay.
let me see. I wrote notes down. Oh, Walter Hood. That's someone you
Okay.
should definitely know. He is unfortunately probably like one of the only Black landscape designers. He's like, or a landscape artist, really. He's not
Okay.
licensed and like made that decision. It wasn't a, he was like, he wants to focus on his art in
Okay.
landscape. So you look him up,
Wow.
really fantastic. And then also Kona Gray. He is so cool. Like you'll look up his picture and you'll just be like, this guy's the coolest guy ever. And he is. Just so chill, gray dreads, like salt and pepper dreads.
Nice. Hey.
Super like he's always been an advocate for making the profession more diverse because like many professions in the US, it's been so white and male. And so he's like, we got to make it more diverse to make it more successful and adaptive and like sustainable. And he's like been a big part of that. And then also last people that I think are like you should know about, there's a magazine called Landscape Architecture Magazine. And it's like a trade magazine, but people like it's a general public magazine too, but like that whole staff is super cool. But the editor in chief, I love her. Her name is Jennifer Roy, and she is just like super cool and is also very much about like pushing the profession forward. So it's like her name would probably come up because she'd just be everywhere trying to like she's probably someone who would love to put credits everywhere too.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you for dropping those names.
Yeah.
What are you up to these days?
I am still podcasting.
Yes.
Lovely. I work at a firm, a very small firm, but it's all woman owned and operated. And it's amazing. Very cool. And we work on local projects. And so I'm the residential department lead there. And that's brings me a lot of joy. I like working with families. So there's that. And I am starting to do more public speaking, which is really exciting.
That's very cool.
And live shows. And so I just did my first live show at this private-ish like arts collective dinner called Rump Food. And they're local and they are just about building community and they're stemming out of like the music and the art scene. And it's really cool. So to be invited to speak there, I was like, really? Me?
Did they love it?
They did, or like at least it seemed like it. I did invite a lot of my friends, so that way I would feel very comfortable. But people really like seem to resonate with it because I picked a local story to tell, and people, a lot of people don't know about these spaces because they don't look like how they used to. So how would you know it was here before? So that's the big things.
You know, with you being a resident focus, or you're like the residential director at your firm and you do like the community piece of everything. All right. So you know that there's Pimp My Ride, there's Hip Hop My House. These are great shows. How can what would like Pimp My Lawn, Hip Hop My Lawn look like to you? Because you know, like we like to keep it hip hop over here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There are, so when thinking about this question, there's two people that pop into my mind that I think so it's a partner team, and their firm is called Typophyla, and they are just like on the cutting edge of all representation for like how you see, like your redesigned lawns. So, like they use 3D modeling, they use drones, they use the scanners, they use like all the technology. Like it is the coolest thing. So like I imagine if there was ever a show, it'd be like maybe I would do the sketch and the design and the concept, and then I'd hand it off to Eric and Nahal, and then they would like make those cool renderings to show like, and this is what it's gonna look like, and this is how it would work. And I would say, so then I would like, in order to get to that point, your beginning steps are like thinking about how you want to use your space. And be realistic. Like, if you don't go outside, then don't talk about building a space where you're always outside. Like, don't do that to yourself. That you're just like wasting money.
Yeah.
What you can do instead is like spend money on like a bunch of different plants. So that way, if you're not outside, you at least have a beautiful view from where you are. That's not just a lawn,
Yeah.
right? Like there's
Yeah.
something for everybody. That's how I like to look at it. And then if you really do want to be outside, then you start to like think about what's easiest for you. Like, don't say you want to put your like veggie garden at the other end of your yard when you really only want to walk 5 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, like being realistic with yourself and understanding that you get to control your space is really important, because a lot of people don't have that connection with outdoor spaces. So if you're ever wanting to pimp your yard, make sure it's what you want and how you would use the space, and also take your time, because landscapes do not happen overnight. I could give you the best design ever and you will not see the vision for another 3 to 5 years, because plants are living things have to grow in. So like whenever you're like someone's designing a space, they're designing years out. They're not designing for day one. And
Gotcha.
I think that's the biggest difference between like people who think about architect and landscape architect. So like an architect builds a building that will more likely than not won't be more valuable or more attractive or more beautiful than day one. Like everything else, it goes down because it gets worn. Landscape architecture is the opposite. It will be the most valuable years and years and years from day one. And sometimes that means 50 years, sometimes that means 25, sometimes that means 100. Like, it will not be valuable on day one. So like that's a huge difference. So keep that in mind when you're trying to pimp.
Yes, I will keep that in mind, because I know like I obviously I don't like bugs. But I do, if I do go out there, like have my girls over, I want to sit and eat. I want it to like be pretty. And I love that you made that point that when you look out the window, you want it to look pretty. Like, yeah, that's what I want. What's like an equivalent to like the flashiest gold chain of plants?
Ooh.
What's like some jazzy plants we could like look at that just come? I don't want to like make it too hard on yourself, but next time we're at like the nursery, what's like the jazziest that people are like, dang.
So I think a big one that people probably like see would be a like cherry blossom tree, something that's just so, people love the cherry blossoms. It seems like kind of like, okay, sometimes it's overused, but it's freaking beautiful. It's like everyone who is someone has that like blooming, really showy flower. So if you're talking about the gold chain of of landscape, it's probably a cherry tree, just because they're so showy. That or like a magnolia tree. Like those are also really gorgeous. So like that to me, I will put those in the gold chain category. And when it comes to like maybe more refined of like luxury, peonies, depending on where you live.
I love those.
See, exactly. It's like peonies, but they're finicky, and they're also like, they have one bloom and then they're done. So it's like you got to really appreciate them. You got to put in all that work to grow them and make them happy, and then enjoy them while you got them, and then they go. Right? Like that is another one that's like people love them. So many people love them, and you got to really, that's a luxury item, I feel like.
Those are good. Yeah, those are pretty jazzy. Like I haven't seen the magnolia tree, but I have seen a cherry blossom tree.
Yeah.
So that sounds pretty fancy. Yeah. I love fancy, so that's great.
I know. Yeah, fancy is like really fun. But there's a lot of like native plants that I love to work with. There are a lot less showy plants that I work with, but that's the thing. There's so much to work with, and depending on what you care about, like if you care about jazzy, then I don't necessarily need to think about pollinators and well, no, that's a lie. I'll always think about pollinators. But I'll know how to like highlight those really showy pieces for you.
Yeah, because you can blend it, right?
Oh,
can you like blend the jazzy with the native?
happens all the
And
time.
native is jazzy. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, native can be super jazzy. Like witch hazels, they're yellow, and oh wait, no, they're not. They're not native. Actually, I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't know. Actually, I'm like, wait a minute.
Get your $75 to $150 an
so
hour
yeah, exactly.
together,
And then I will
talk
tell
about
you.
it.
I will let you know.
I will research it.
I will double check my history. I was reading a plant book last night. You'd think I would know, but sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. Sometimes that recall is just not there.
Well, it's just like endless of stuff to know. Like, how could you know it all? Especially right off the cuff like this. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I was like, other landscape architects listening, they'll be like, that was a shame. I'll be like, yeah, okay. I'm human. All right. No. Yeah. Your mom's a shame. Don't come at me.
They're like, dang, aren't you a mom? Aren't you trying to be a mom? Like that, Ann?
Yeah. And what? We are,
oh my gosh,
dynamic people.
Yeah, we are. Oh my gosh. Maci, thanks so much for talking to me about all this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Just spreading that good ministry word on landscape architecture. Just trying to keep me out here.
Listen, I think that's so true. You know what? Especially for Black and brown folks, because we're so jazzy anyway. And I'm just like, I want the full jazzy experience from everything. Even when we look out, like I do have like green grass, but like my backyard is what I can control. And it's like, how can I make it jazzy? And then even like in my neighborhoods, like, what can I do? And like, I'm always just like thinking of like social practice community efforts. And so I feel like these types of conversations, this ministry is just as important because it's like, dude, what if like you can get a bunch of like, I don't even know if that's possible in Chicago, but like cherry blossom trees down 87th Street. Like, how dope would that be? Like, I don't know. It's
like, yeah. And just on that real quick, because there's two things that popped in my mind is like, yeah, the more people know, the more they can kind of push for what works for them in these like public settings too, because there are reasons why certain trees aren't allowed, but also it's worth a conversation. Like, and it's also worth that being like, a dialogue between city or like public and then public service. Like if the public wants something and they think it's going to be beneficial, then it allows for them to have an actual conversation about why it does or doesn't work.
Yeah.
Hugely beneficial. But when you were saying like you want jazzy and like people of color, I 100% agree with you. That was actually another reason the podcast started, is because I asked the question at school, why don't we have pink streets? And none of my teachers could answer. So I'm going to use this as a way to plug my friend Divine, because she is from Burundi and she just has a total different sensibility of like what could be. And I think you would absolutely have a blast talking to her, because like you and me talking, it's like nerdy level, and we're like navigating our like Western sensibilities and like American sensibilities of what we know in that. And like I'm trying to put in like landscape in that frame. But for her, it's so much more global, and like it's so much more fun. Like I can get there. I just don't sound. I get there and I enjoy it.
Like, sure, of course.
But I am very much so like an educator in that way. So I really feed off of like who I'm talking to. But Divine is so much her that she will tell you about what this landscape could be. She's going to tell you what the colors can be. She can paint that picture. And I think you would love talking to her.
Yeah, I'm so mind blown. Like, I didn't even think about the streets could be a different color. Like,
that's what I'm saying. It's like I'm working in this, like, all right, we got
turquoise gravel or something. Like,
yeah, it's
that
like,
would be so fun.
Yeah, like what are the possibilities? Like, we have our world here in the U.S. is so gray. It's like so gray and green. Like that's about it. Like you're talking about lawns. It's like gray and green. But it could be so much more than that. So much more than that. And we don't even get to touch on that because we're just trying to get people to not be obsessed with lawns. Like that's where I think like we're just like trying to get that as that baseline.
I know,
like,
right? It's like we're trying to get folks to not like yell at the kids walking to the corner store that like rolled their bike over your grass and like now you're out cursing folks out. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we got to get it together.
Baby steps.
For sure. Well, that's good to know. And yeah, I'm so excited, so energized from this conversation. So I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Let me know anytime. Anytime you want to talk. I'm here. Yeah, I was gonna say, is there anything else?
Yes.
Oh,
Anything else before we call
anything
this
else?
conversation
Oh,
complete?
yeah, just because, you and I both being women of color, like I know I'm very ambiguous looking, but my father is black.
I
So
knew you were black. I knew you were black.
okay, good. Some people don't know, and I'm like, all right. But there is an organization that's been so wonderful to work with, and they are called Black Land. So they're the Black Landscape Architecture Network, and they really helped me kind of stay connected, especially during 2020 and onward, of
Yeah.
like, how do you find your voice and space in this profession that has been so white and so male and so like narrow, that's how I'm connected to people who are really just pushing boundaries, and I'm all for it. But I just wanted to plug them because they deserve so much credit for like supporting this kind of content, supporting like design and art conversations amongst
Yeah.
Black people. So
Yeah. No, and I'm so excited for you. Like with this podcast, you're like speaking, like you're really, as you may not even realize, like becoming a face and voice, in landscape design, architecture, and I think that
right.
that's so cool. Like just as your friend to see that developing, because especially from the outside in, because like we could talk about this stuff and talk about like the details of like our creative practices of our podcast and all that kind of stuff. But then like outside, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like really becoming like a thing. And what I love too is because I love like I'm multidisciplined, like I do all sorts of different things. But I think too, it's something like when there's in the niche, but then also it's not really even a niche because there's so many levels within
Mhm.
landscape. So I just love when it's like, to me, it seems like, okay, this is super focused, super dedicated. And I love that. But then even learning from talking to you today, how it's just like even still levels in it. So I
Yeah.
love it and I'm here for it.
Yay. I always say, if you've been outside, there's something for us to talk about.
Yeah.
That's
And we
really it.
stay outside,
We
especially
stay
with the
outside.
summertime.
Exactly.
The
So
summertime.
I
So
expect to be talking to a lot of people. That's what I
yes,
expect.
absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning into the Nosy AF podcast with me, your host, your friend, Stephanie Graham. I'm so glad that you made it to the end of this conversation. Please kindly let me know what you thought by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening right now. You can also connect with me at nosyaf.com via the Say Hello button. And if you're curious about what's going on in my art and film life, please visit my website at missgraham.com. Oh, and also, if there is someone that you're nosy about and you want me to have them on the show, please send suggestions via the same hello button and I will check them out. Until next time, thank you so much for being you and see you soon. Peace.